Hey everyone! Today we're diving into one of the most disturbing secrets hiding in plain sight, the moon. That glowing sphere we've romanticized for millennia. It might be the most sophisticated trap humanity has ever encountered. Over the next hour, I'll show you evidence that suggests our moon isn't what we think it is, reveal why every mission there has encountered inexplicable anomalies, and explain why some scientists believe returning to the moon could trigger something catastrophic. Stick with me because what you're about to hear will fundamentally change how you see that light in the night sky. Introduction: the moon has been Earth's companion for billions of years, or so we've been told. But what if everything we know about our celestial neighbor is carefully constructed misdirection? What if the moon isn't a natural satellite at all, but something far more sinister? Chapter 1. The impossible moon. Let's start with the basics, because even those don't make sense. The moon is roughly 27% the size of Earth. Now, compare that to any other moon in our solar system. Mars' moons, Phobos and Deimos, are tiny rocks. Jupiter's largest moon, Ganymede, is only 2.7% of Jupiter's size. Saturn's Titan, about 2.4%. Our moon is proportionally enormous, and that's our first red flag. But size is just the beginning. The moon is moving away from Earth at about 3.8 centimeters per year. We can measure this precisely using laser reflectors left by Apollo missions. If we run the clock backward, something terrifying emerges. About 1.5 billion years ago, the moon would have been so close to Earth that tidal forces would have torn both bodies apart. Yet both Earth and moon existed then, with geological records to prove it. How is this possible? The standard explanation is the giant impact hypothesis. About 4.5 billion years ago, a Mars-sized object called Theia supposedly slammed into Earth. The debris coalesced into our moon. It's a neat story, taught in every astronomy class. But here's what they don't emphasize. The computer simulations that support this theory only work if you cherry-pick very specific conditions. Change the impact angle by a few degrees, adjust the speed slightly, and you get outcomes that look nothing like our Earth-Moon system. Dr. Sarah Krasnikoff, a planetary geologist who worked at NASA for 15 years before speaking out, put it bluntly in a 2019 interview. We teach the giant impact hypothesis because we have nothing better, not because the evidence is compelling. The math works if you force it to work, but nature doesn't negotiate with our equations. So what's really going on? Let me show you something that'll make your skin crawl. The moon's orbit is nearly perfectly circular, with an eccentricity of just 0.0549. For comparison, most captured objects in space have highly elliptical orbits. They swoop in close, then swing far away. The moon doesn't do this. It maintains an almost suspiciously stable path. Then there's the synchronous rotation. The moon always shows us the same face. Always. Every moon in the solar system that does this is either very close to its planet or has been orbiting for an incredibly long time, allowing tidal forces to lock it in place. But the moon achieved this lock surprisingly quickly in astronomical terms. But wait, it gets stranger. In the 1960s and 70s, Apollo missions placed seismometers on the lunar surface. When spent rocket stages crashed into the moon, something unexpected happened. The moon rang like a bell. Not for minutes, for hours. One impact caused reverberations that lasted over 3 hours. Dr. Clive Ross, whose analysis of Apollo seismic data earned him both acclaim and suspicion, wrote in his final paper before his mysterious disappearance in 1987. A solid, homogeneous sphere doesn't ring like this. A hollow one does. The official explanation: the moon's interior structure dampens seismic waves differently than Earth's. But Dr. Ross argued that the data suggested large hollow spaces within the moon. His calculations indicated that if the moon were solid throughout with the mass we measure, the ringing would have stopped much faster. NASA archived his paper and stopped funding his research. Chapter 2. The numbers that don't add up. Let's talk about the solar eclipse, because it might be the universe's most suspicious coincidence, or its most deliberate design. The sun is 400 times larger than the moon. The sun is also 400 times farther away from Earth than the moon. This means that, from our perspective, the sun and moon appear almost exactly the same size in the sky. This allows for perfect total solar eclipses, where the moon precisely covers the sun, revealing the corona. What are the odds? Astronomer Dr. Michael Varencourt calculated this probability in 2003. Taking into account the size ranges of moons and stars, orbital distances, and the number of planets in the universe, he estimated that the chance of this occurring naturally was approximately 1 in 10 million for any given planet. Earth hit the cosmic lottery. Or did we? When I see perfect alignment in nature, I don't see coincidence, Dr. Varencourt stated in a lecture that was later removed from the university's public archives. I see engineering. The precision required to place an object of exact apparent size at the exact distance for perfect eclipses suggests intention. But intention by whom? For what purpose? Here's another numerical anomaly. The moon's density. At 3.34 grams per cubic centimeter, it's considerably less dense than Earth's 5.52. The standard explanation is that the moon formed from Earth's outer layers after the Theia impact, and those layers are less dense than Earth's iron core. But let's examine this more carefully. If you were to build a hollow sphere and wanted to disguise it as a solid object, you'd add mass to the exterior to create the right gravitational pull. The moon's gravitational anomalies, called mascons, mass concentrations, are exactly what you'd expect from such a construction. These mascons exist primarily on the near side, the side always facing Earth, as if to ensure the gravitational measurements from Earth appear consistent with a solid body. When Apollo 15 astronaut David Scott dropped a hammer and feather on the moon, demonstrating that they fell at the same rate in the moon's vacuum, something else happened that few noticed. The lunar dust behaved oddly. Instead of billowing outward as it would in any atmosphere or settling quickly as it would in pure vacuum, it moved in patterns that suggested electrostatic charging. The dust stuck to everything, Scott later reported. It behaved like it had a mind of its own. Lunar dust is electrostatically charged by solar radiation, we're told. But the patterns and behaviors observed suggested something more. A weak electromagnetic field emanating from beneath the surface, as if the moon's interior contained active electrical systems. Chapter 3. The dark side secrets. The far side of the moon, never visible from Earth due to tidal locking, has always been shrouded in mystery. When the Soviet Luna 3 probe first photographed it in 1959, scientists expected to see terrain similar to the near side. They were wrong. The far side has almost no maria, those dark basaltic plains formed by ancient volcanic activity that dominate the near side. Instead, it's covered with craters and highlands. The crust is about 50 kilometers thicker on the far side than on the near. Why would the same celestial body have such different hemispheres? The standard explanation involves the moon's orientation during its formation and differential cooling. But this explanation becomes strained when you examine the details. The dichotomy is too pronounced, too systematic. Then there's the crater distribution. Small craters appear randomly distributed, as expected from meteor impacts. But large craters on the far side show a curious pattern. Dr. Jennifer Watanabe's 2015 analysis of Chinese Chang'e 2 orbital data revealed that major craters on the far side align in ways that are statistically improbable for random impacts. Imagine dropping marbles onto a sphere hundreds of times, Dr. Watanabe explained. They should land randomly. But what if they don't? What if they avoid certain areas and cluster in others? That suggests the sphere has zones with different properties, dense areas that capture impacts, and areas that somehow deflect them. Her paper was published in a minor journal after 3 major publications rejected it. She hasn't published anything on the moon since. In 1968, Apollo 8 became the first manned spacecraft to orbit the moon. As the crew passed behind the far side, losing radio contact with Earth, something strange happened. Commander Frank Borman reported hearing unexplained music, strange whistling sounds that couldn't be explained by any known interference pattern. NASA classified this as VHF interference between the command and lunar modules. But the same sound was reported by Apollo 10 astronauts the following year. Pilot Michael Collins of Apollo 11 described a weird music during his solo orbit while Armstrong and Aldrin were on the surface. The recordings were declassified in 2008, yet the origin of the sounds remains officially unexplained. The whistling has a rhythmic, almost mechanical quality. Some audio analysts have suggested it sounds less like interference and more like a signal, a transmission. Who was transmitting? And what were they saying? Chapter 4. The Apollo anomalies. Let's examine what actually happened during the Apollo missions, not the sanitized version in history books, but the documented anomalies that have sparked decades of speculation. Apollo 11, July 1969. Armstrong and Aldrin are on the lunar surface. During their moonwalk, there was a 2-minute period when all public communication was cut. Only Mission Control heard what the astronauts said during this gap. The official explanation: a technical issue with transmission. But radio engineers have pointed out that the type of interference reported couldn't cause a clean 2-minute gap. Interference creates static or breaks up audio. It doesn't create perfect silence followed by perfect resumption. What happened during those 2 minutes? According to unofficial transcripts that leaked years later, transcripts NASA has never confirmed or denied, Armstrong reported seeing lights on a crater rim. Not reflections or Earth light, but lights that appeared to be moving with purpose. Then there's the famous Santa Claus incident. As Apollo 8 emerged from behind the moon on Christmas Eve 1968, astronaut James Lovell radioed. "Please be informed, there is a Santa Claus." NASA insists this was Lovell's whimsical way of confirming a successful orbit. But in NASA communication protocols, where every word is chosen for clarity and precision, why use a code phrase? Some researchers believe Santa Claus was prearranged code for "we are not alone." The Apollo 12 mission in November 1969 experienced an even more disturbing event. Commander Pete Conrad and Alan Bean were setting up experiments when their seismic equipment detected vibrations. Not from their footsteps or equipment. The vibrations came from below, in rhythmic pulses. "It's like something down there is knocking," Bean reported. Mission Control suggested it was equipment interference or lunar thermal expansion. But the pattern was too regular. The pulses occurred every 47 seconds for approximately 8 minutes, then stopped abruptly. The seismic data from that event was classified for 15 years. When finally released, large portions were redacted. Why redact geological data? What could seismic readings reveal that requires national security protection? Apollo 13's accident, Houston, we've had a problem, is famous for the oxygen tank explosion that crippled the spacecraft. What's less known is that during their improvised swing around the moon, as they passed over the far side, all 3 astronauts reported seeing flashes of light inside the spacecraft. NASA explained these as cosmic rays hitting the astronauts' optic nerves. This phenomenon is real and has been observed in space. But the flashes reported during Apollo 13 were different. They weren't the small pinpoints of light cosmic rays create. According to Commander Jim Lovell's private notes, published in an obscure autobiography, the flashes were structured, geometric, like symbols scrolling past. The crew was debriefed separately and extensively after their return. Those debriefing transcripts remain classified. Chapter 5. The construction hypothesis. Let's say, hypothetically, that the moon isn't a natural satellite. Let's say it's artificial, a constructed object. What would we expect to see? First, we'd expect unusual composition. Check. Moon rocks returned by Apollo missions show isotope ratios that don't match Earth's, despite the giant impact theory claiming the moon formed from Earth material. Oxygen isotopes are identical, suggesting common origin, but titanium isotopes are different, suggesting separate origin. The scientific community has struggled to reconcile this contradiction for 50 years. Second, we'd expect signs of construction. In 1970, a photograph taken by the lunar orbiter showed what appeared to be a massive geometric structure inside a crater on the far side. The object, dubbed the shard, stands vertically, casting a shadow that indicates it's about 1.5 miles tall. NASA claimed it was an image artifact, a trick of light and shadow. But subsequent imaging from different angles and in different lighting conditions shows the object consistently. Image artifacts don't remain consistent across multiple photographs from different perspectives. Russian scientists analyzed the same data independently and published a report suggesting the shard is a physical object of artificial origin. That report has disappeared from most databases, though copies circulate in certain research communities. Third, we'd expect energy signatures. During Apollo missions, heat sensors detected inexplicable temperature variations on the lunar surface. Some craters on the far side maintain temperatures higher than surrounding terrain despite being in shadow for weeks at a time. The heat comes from below. Radioactive decay in the lunar interior, we're told. But the heat distribution is too localized, too inconsistent with the random distribution of radioactive elements. Professor Anatoly Chernikov proposed in 1985 that these hotspots mark ventilation systems, places where internal heat escapes from a hollow interior that houses machinery. His research grant was cancelled, and he was pressured to recant his hypothesis. He refused and spent the rest of his career teaching high school physics in Siberia. Let's talk about the moon's origin from a different angle. Every natural satellite in our solar system formed either alongside its planet, regular satellites, or was captured by gravity, irregular satellites. The moon doesn't fit either category cleanly. If it formed alongside Earth, why is its composition so different? If it was captured, how did it achieve such a perfectly circular orbit and tidal lock so quickly? There's a third category no one wants to discuss. Artificial placement. What if the moon was built elsewhere and positioned in Earth's orbit deliberately? The precision of its placement would explain the eclipse coincidence. The hollow interior would explain the seismic ringing. The compositional anomalies would make sense if the moon was constructed from material sourced from multiple locations in the solar system. But why? Who would build a moon and why place it around Earth? Chapter 6. The Watchers. Let me tell you about the structures. Not the questionable photographs that circulate online, but the documented anomalies that have forced even skeptical scientists to ask uncomfortable questions. In 1966, Lunar Orbiter 2 captured an image of an area called Sinus Medii. The photograph shows what appears to be a cluster of obelisk-like structures arranged in a geometric pattern. NASA analyzed the image and determined the objects were photographed from an altitude of approximately 25 miles and would stand between 40 and 70 feet tall. A team including William Blair, the Boeing Corporation's chief of photographic sciences, examined the photograph. Blair stated publicly that the objects appeared to be structures of some kind, noting their arrangement suggested design rather than nature. NASA's final report classified them as photographic artifacts despite Blair's assessment. Similar structures appear in multiple Apollo photographs. Frame 4822 from Apollo 15 shows what appears to be a massive rectangular structure partially buried in lunar regolith. The object has clear right angles and appears to be made of material distinct from surrounding terrain. Commander David Scott never officially commented on this photograph. But in an unauthorized interview years later, he allegedly stated, "We saw things up there. Things we were told not to discuss. You follow orders." Then there's the bridge. NASA's catalog number 4822 shows what appears to be a massive bridge-like structure in the Sea of Crisis. The structure spans approximately 12 miles and rises several hundred feet above the surface. It casts a shadow consistent with an elevated structure. Geologists suggested it might be an unusual lava formation. But lava doesn't form straight, elevated structures with uniform width across miles of terrain. The structure is too geometric, too purposeful. Perhaps most disturbing are the towers. Multiple Apollo missions photographed spire-like structures on the lunar surface, particularly near crater rims. These aren't mountains or rock formations. They're slender, vertical, and remarkably symmetrical. One tower near the crater Euclid stands approximately 7 miles high. Its width remains consistent from base to tip, defying geological explanation. Natural formations taper due to structural stress. Constructed ones don't have to. Dr. Bruce Cornett, a geologist who analyzed these structures, stated, "These are buildings. I don't know who built them or when, but they're not natural. The geometry is too precise." His career ended shortly after he made these statements publicly. Chapter 7. The frequency. Here's something that'll make you question reality itself. The moon generates a signal. Not in the electromagnetic spectrum where we typically look for signals. This is subtler, operating at frequencies that interact with consciousness rather than radio receivers. Sounds like pseudoscience? Let's look at the evidence. NASA's Lunar Atmosphere and Dust Environment Explorer, LADEE, mission in 2013 to 2014 detected extremely low-frequency electromagnetic pulses emanating from the lunar surface. These pulses occurred in a rhythmic pattern, approximately one pulse every 34 seconds. The official explanation involved solar-wind interactions with the lunar surface. But the pattern remained consistent even when the measured solar wind varied significantly. The pulse was too regular, too stable. Dr. Maurice Chatelain, former NASA communications director, went on record in 1979 stating, "All Apollo and Gemini flights were followed at a distance, and sometimes quite closely, by space vehicles of extraterrestrial origin. Every time it occurred, the astronauts informed Mission Control, who then ordered absolute silence." Chatelain claimed these vehicles emanated from the moon. His statements were dismissed as attention-seeking by mainstream science. But Chatelain had impeccable credentials and nothing to gain from fabrication. He died in 1983, and many of his private research files disappeared from his estate. Let's consider the biological effects. Numerous studies have documented the moon's influence on human behavior, typically dismissed as superstition. But the data tells a different story. Police departments worldwide report increased calls during full moons. Hospital emergency rooms see spikes in admissions. Studies of psychiatric hospitals show increased agitation among patients. We attribute this to the lunar effect without asking why a ball of rock 238,000 miles away would influence human neurology. Unless it's not just a ball of rock. Dr. Arnold Lieber published research in the 1970s showing correlations between lunar phases and human behavior. His methodology was sound, his data robust. The scientific establishment rejected his work, not because his methods were flawed, but because the implications were uncomfortable. How could the moon influence human behavior? Through gravitational effects on water in our bodies, some suggested. But the gravitational force from the moon on a human is negligible compared to the gravitational force from nearby objects like buildings or cars. What if the moon influences us through something other than gravity? What if those electromagnetic pulses LEDI detected aren't random but constitute a signal, a broadcast that affects consciousness? Consider sleep patterns. Numerous studies show disrupted sleep during full moons, even in controlled environments where subjects can't see the moon. Light pollution doesn't explain this. What does? In 2013, Swiss researchers at the University of Basel found that sleep quality decreased around full moons even in windowless rooms with controlled lighting. Subjects took longer to fall asleep, slept less deeply, and reported feeling less rested. The moon was affecting them through some mechanism other than light. Chapter 8. The trap activates. Now we reach the truly terrifying question. If the moon is artificial, if it's broadcasting a signal, if it's affecting human consciousness, why? What's the purpose? Let's examine human history through this lens. Civilization as we know it emerged roughly 10,000 years ago. Before that, humans were hunter-gatherers for hundreds of thousands of years. Then, suddenly, we developed agriculture, built cities, created complex societies. What changed? The moon has been in orbit much longer than 10,000 years, of course. But what if something about the moon changed? What if it activated? Ancient texts from multiple cultures describe the moon differently than we see it today. Some Greek philosophers spoke of a time before the moon. Aristotle mentioned that Arcadian people of ancient Greece claimed their ancestors. Most historians dismiss these accounts as myth. But myths often contain kernels of truth, especially when multiple independent cultures tell similar stories. The Zulu people of South Africa have legends of a time before the moon, when the sky was different and people lived differently. Colombian tribal histories speak of a time when the moon was brought to Earth. What if these aren't myths but memories? Here's a hypothesis that explains everything we've observed. The moon is a control system, placed in Earth orbit to influence human development. It wasn't always active. For most of human prehistory, it was dormant. Then, approximately 10,000 years ago, it activated. The frequency it broadcasts interacts with human consciousness, specifically enhancing certain cognitive functions while suppressing others. It made us more focused, more organized, more capable of abstract thought and long-term planning. These are the exact traits needed for civilization. But here's the trap. The same signal that enhanced our cognitive abilities also made us dependent on it. Our brains adapted to the presence of the signal over 10,000 years. Generations of humans have developed with the moon's influence as a baseline condition. What happens if the signal stops? Dr. Patricia Mackenzie conducted research in the 1990s using electromagnetic shielding to block extremely low-frequency signals from subjects. After 48 hours of shielding, subjects exhibited dramatic psychological changes. They became less focused, more instinctual, and reported feeling disconnected from their normal selves. Her research was shut down by the ethics board for causing psychological distress to participants. But the implications are staggering. Human consciousness may require external input to function as we understand normal. Chapter 9. The Soviet files. When the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, some classified documents made their way to the West. Among them were files from the Soviet lunar program that were never meant to be public. One document, translated and analyzed by Dr. Alexander Popov before his death in 1997, detailed Soviet plans for a manned lunar base in the 1970s. The program was cancelled not due to funding issues, as officially stated, but because of what unmanned probes discovered. According to the document, Luna 13, which landed on the Moon in December 1966, detected regular radio pulses emanating from beneath the lunar surface. The pulses weren't random noise but followed a mathematical pattern, specifically, prime numbers. Prime number sequences are a universal signal of intelligence. They cannot occur naturally with any frequency. The Soviet scientists monitoring Luna 13 initially thought the signal was interference from Earth. But the signal persisted when Earth wasn't visible from the probe's location. It was coming from the Moon itself. Luna 15, launched as the Soviets' attempt to upstage Apollo 11 and return lunar samples first, had a secret secondary mission according to the leaked files. It carried equipment designed to locate the source of the radio pulses. Luna 15 crashed on the Moon on July 21, 1969, just hours before Apollo 11 departed. The official explanation was navigational error. The leaked document suggests something different. Luna 15 was shot down. By what? The document doesn't specify. It only notes that telemetry showed Luna 15 experiencing directed energy impact before losing signal. The Soviets never tried another sample return mission in that region of the Moon. Even more disturbing is a document allegedly from a classified Soviet briefing in 1972. According to this document, Soviet analysis of American lunar photographs revealed artificial structures on the far side. The Soviets concluded that someone else had been on the Moon long before humanity arrived. The document recommended against establishing a lunar base, citing unknown risk factors and potential hostile presence. The Soviet lunar program ended shortly after. The Americans never established their planned lunar bases either, despite Apollo's success. The official reason was budget cuts. But both superpowers, locked in the Cold War and competing for every possible advantage, simultaneously abandoned the Moon after 1972. Why would rivals both abandon a strategic high ground? Unless they both discovered something that made them reconsider whether the Moon was a safe place for humans to be. Chapter 10. The message in the rocks. The Moon rocks brought back by Apollo missions have been studied extensively for over 50 years. The official story is that they tell us about the Moon's geological history and its formation. But there's another story hidden in the rocks, one that few researchers have dared to discuss publicly. In 1975, Dr. Robert Jastrow, founding director of NASA's Goddard Institute for Space Studies, made a curious statement during a lecture at Columbia University. He said that lunar samples contained information that appears encoded. He wasn't speaking metaphorically. Jastrow had discovered that certain isotope ratios in Apollo samples followed mathematical patterns that shouldn't exist in natural geological formations. The ratios between specific elements weren't random but followed a sequence. Jastrow never published this finding. When questioned about it later, he claimed he'd been misquoted. But several attendees of that lecture confirm his statement, and at least one took detailed notes that still exist. What kind of information could be encoded in rock composition? And who would encode it? Think about it. If you wanted to leave a message that would survive for billions of years, impervious to erosion, radiation, and time itself, you wouldn't write it on a surface. You'd encode it in the atomic structure of materials. You'd use isotope ratios, the relative abundance of different versions of elements, to create a pattern that wouldn't degrade over time. Dr. Maria Sanchez, a geochemist who worked briefly with NASA analyzing lunar samples, discovered something similar in 1983. She found that the distribution of rare earth elements in one particular Apollo 17 sample followed what she described as an obviously non-random pattern. Sanchez presented her findings at an internal NASA conference. Her presentation was never made public, and she left NASA shortly afterward. In a private letter to a colleague years later, she wrote, "They didn't want me to find what I found. The implications terrified them." What implications? What did the pattern reveal? According to researchers who've tried to replicate Sanchez's work using publicly available data on lunar samples, the rare earth element pattern, if graphed, resembles a mathematical function, specifically, a spiral that matches the golden ratio. The golden ratio, approximately 1.618, appears throughout nature in everything from seashells to galaxies. But it appearing in the elemental composition of lunar rocks suggests deliberate construction rather than natural formation. It's like finding a signature. Chapter 11. The astronauts who knew too much of the 12 men who walked on the moon, their post-Apollo lives tell a disturbing story. Several experienced profound psychological changes. Several made cryptic statements about their time on the lunar surface. And several died under circumstances that raise questions. Edgar Mitchell, Apollo 14 astronaut, became one of the most vocal about his suspicions regarding the moon. Mitchell publicly stated he believed in extraterrestrial life and that governments were hiding information about it. But his specific statements about the moon were more troubling. In a 2015 interview shortly before his death, Mitchell said, "The moon is not what you think it is. We barely scratched the surface, literally. What's underneath? That's the question NASA doesn't want answered." When pressed, Mitchell wouldn't elaborate. He only added, "I signed agreements. But I'm old now, and I think people deserve hints at least." Mitchell died in 2016 at age 85. The official cause was natural, complications from old age. But colleagues reported he was writing a book about his experiences on the moon in the months before his death. The manuscript has never surfaced. James Irwin, Apollo 15, experienced what he described as a spiritual awakening on the moon. He left NASA and became an evangelical minister, dedicating his life to searching for Noah's Ark. This career change puzzled many who knew him as a pragmatic engineer and test pilot. But Irwin made statements that suggested his spiritual awakening was connected to something he saw or experienced on the moon. In a 1983 sermon, he said, "On the moon, I understood that we are not the first. God has been working in this universe far longer than we imagined." Irwin died in 1991 at age 61 from a heart attack, his third. Some have suggested his earlier heart attacks were triggered by extreme stress, though the source of that stress was never identified. The most disturbing case is that of Brian O'Leary, who wasn't an Apollo astronaut but was selected for a Mars mission that never flew. O'Leary left NASA and became an outspoken critic of the space agency's secrecy. He claimed astronauts were debriefed about their lunar experiences and told to forget certain things they saw. "There is abundant evidence that we are being contacted," O'Leary stated in 2007. "Civilizations have been visiting us for a very long time. Their appearance is bizarre from any kind of Western materialistic world." He specifically mentioned the moon as a way station for these visitors. O'Leary died in 2011 from an intestinal blockage while living in Ecuador. Some of his colleagues found his death suspicious, noting he'd been in good health and was planning to publish a book exposing what he knew about the moon. The book was never published. Chapter 12. The vanishing probes. Since the 1960s, nations have sent dozens of probes to the moon. Not all of them succeeded. But the pattern of failures is curious. Between 1958 and 1976, the Soviet Union attempted 41 lunar missions. 20 completely failed, that's a 49% failure rate. For a space program that successfully sent probes to Venus, Mars, and beyond, this failure rate on relatively close moon missions is statistically anomalous. But it's the specific failures that raise eyebrows. Several Soviet probes lost contact with Earth while on the lunar far side, never to be heard from again. Luna 12 stopped transmitting suddenly in 1966. Luna 15 crashed mysteriously. The Luna 18 and Luna 23 landers both failed during landing attempts, with telemetry suggesting interference rather than mechanical failure. The Soviet space program was remarkably reliable in other endeavors. Why so many failures at the Moon? The Americans had their own losses. The Ranger series of hard-impact probes had 6 failures before 3 successes. Surveyor 4 lost contact just moments before landing in 1967. The official explanation was an explosion, but no debris field was ever identified. More recently, China's space program experienced a troubling incident. In 2013, China successfully landed Chang'e 3 on the Moon, becoming the third nation to achieve a soft landing. The mission was a triumph. But Chang'e 3 carried a rover called U2, Jade Rabbit. After exploring for just 2 months, U2 encountered what Chinese space officials described as a mechanical control abnormality and became immobile. Before losing functionality, U2 sent back photographs that Chinese space enthusiasts analyzed extensively. Some of these photographs show what appear to be unusual objects on the lunar surface, geometric shapes that don't resemble natural rock formations. Chinese space authorities never released official analysis of these objects. U2's malfunction occurred shortly after photographing them. In 2019, China landed Chang'e 4 on the far side of the Moon, the first mission to land there. The mission has been successful, but curiously, China has released far fewer images and data from Chang'e 4 than from previous lunar missions. What did they find that they're not sharing? India's Chandrayaan-2 mission in 2019 attempted to land on the Moon's south pole but lost contact with the lander during descent. The orbiter continues to function and has returned valuable data, but the circumstances of the lander's loss remain unclear. Israel's Beresheet lander crashed in 2019 during a landing attempt. Japan's Omotenashi lander failed in 2022. Russia's Luna 25, Russia's first lunar mission in 47 years, crashed in 2023. These recent failures, coming after decades of successful planetary missions by these same nations, suggest the Moon remains hazardous for spacecraft in ways we don't fully understand. Or perhaps in ways that are being actively kept from us. Chapter 13. The ancient warnings: if the Moon is artificial and potentially dangerous, humans today aren't the first to notice. Ancient cultures worldwide recorded observations of the Moon that are difficult to explain within our current understanding. The Sumerian texts, among the oldest written records of human civilization, contain detailed astronomical knowledge that shouldn't have been possible with their technology. The Sumerians accurately described the solar system, including the number of planets, knowledge we only reconfirmed in the modern era. But the Sumerian accounts of the Moon are particularly intriguing. They described it not as a natural satellite but as something that arrived. The Epic of Gilgamesh contains passages suggesting the Moon was brought by the Anunnaki, the gods in Sumerian mythology. Most scholars interpret this as mythological language. But what if it's descriptive? The Vedic texts of ancient India also contain anomalous descriptions of the Moon. The Rig Veda describes it as the measurer of days but also as something placed in the heavens by design. Several passages suggest the Moon wasn't always present in Earth's sky. In ancient Chinese astronomy, the Moon was associated with yin energy and control. But older texts, particularly the Shanhai Jing, classic of mountains and seas, describe a time of the 2 moons followed by a time of 1 moon that remains. 2 moons. What happened to the other? Perhaps most telling are the Mayan astronomical records. The Maya were obsessed with celestial cycles and tracked them with incredible precision. Their lunar calendars were accurate to within seconds over thousands of years. But the Maya also left inscriptions suggesting they believed the Moon was watching them, not as a deity, but as a tool of observation. The Moon was the eye of the night in Mayan cosmology, but the context suggests surveillance rather than illumination. The Dogon people of Mali possess astronomical knowledge they shouldn't have without telescopes. They knew about Sirius B, a white dwarf star invisible to the naked eye, centuries before Western astronomers discovered it. But the Dogon also have oral traditions about the Moon that are disturbing. According to Dogon cosmology, the Moon is hollow and serves as a vessel. When anthropologists first recorded these beliefs in the 1930s, they assumed it was primitive misunderstanding. But the Dogon were right about Sirius B. What if they're right about the Moon? The Aboriginal Australians, whose oral traditions stretch back over 40,000 years, have stories about a time when the sky was different. In their Dreamtime legends, the moon came from far away and changed everything. What's remarkable is that these stories from Australia match stories from Africa, Asia, and the Americas, cultures that had no contact with each other. Independent cultures separated by oceans, all telling stories about the moon arriving or being placed in the sky. Coincidence? Or racial memory of an actual event? Chapter 14. The magnetic anomaly. Let's talk about something measurable, something undeniable. The moon's magnetic field, or rather, the absence of one. The moon has no global magnetic field. This makes sense for a geologically dead body with no molten core to generate magnetism through dynamo action. Except the moon isn't entirely non-magnetic. Lunar rocks returned by Apollo missions are surprisingly magnetic, far more than they should be if the moon never had a magnetic field. Some samples show magnetization that could only occur in the presence of a magnetic field thousands of times stronger than Earth's current field. Where did this magnetization come from? The standard explanation is that the moon had a magnetic field billions of years ago when its core was still molten, and rocks formed during that period retained the magnetization. But the distribution of magnetic anomalies on the moon doesn't support this theory. The magnetic anomalies aren't random. They're concentrated in specific locations, particularly on the far side. Some form patterns, geometric arrangements that look less like geological accidents and more like, well, circuitry. Dr. Herbert Zook, analyzing Apollo magnetometer data in 1974, published a paper noting that magnetic anomalies near the crater Van de Graaff on the far side formed an almost rectangular pattern covering approximately 200 square kilometers. Natural magnetic fields don't form rectangles. His paper suggested the possibility of subsurface ferromagnetic structures of artificial origin. The paper was published once, then disappeared from scientific databases. Requests for copies from the original journal went unanswered. In 2011, NASA's Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter detected additional magnetic anomalies with even higher resolution mapping. The data confirmed what earlier missions suggested. The magnetic patterns are too organized to be natural. One pattern near the crater Reiner Gamma resembles what electrical engineers would recognize as a circuit diagram, specifically, an antenna array. The magnetic field strengths at different points in the pattern vary in ways that would optimize for receiving or transmitting electromagnetic signals. Who would build an antenna array on the moon? And what are they transmitting or receiving? Chapter 15. The tunnels. Here's something NASA doesn't advertise widely. The moon has tunnels. Lots of them. These aren't theoretical. In 2009, the Japanese Kaguya probe detected a massive hole on the moon's surface, approximately 65 meters across and 80 meters deep. Subsequent analysis revealed it wasn't just a hole, it was a skylight into a much larger underground tunnel. The Marius Hills Hole, as it's now called, opens into a lava tube estimated to be 50 kilometers long and wide enough to contain entire cities. NASA's own analysis confirmed this tunnel could shelter human habitations from radiation and micrometeorite impacts. But here's what's strange. The tunnel is too perfect. Lava tubes on Earth are rough, irregular, and prone to collapse. The Marius Hills Tunnel, according to ground-penetrating radar data, has remarkably smooth walls and a uniform diameter across its entire length. Lava doesn't flow that precisely. Since the Marius Hills discovery, over 200 similar skylights have been identified on the lunar surface. The majority are on the far side. These tunnels connect, forming a network beneath the lunar surface. A network that covers thousands of kilometers. In 2012, India's Chandrayaan-1 mission used ground-penetrating radar to map subsurface structures near the lunar North Pole. The data showed tunnels running in straight lines for hundreds of kilometers, something lava tubes never do. Lava follows the path of least resistance, creating meandering tunnels. These lunar tunnels run straight, as if deliberately excavated. The Chandrayaan-1 data also detected large hollow spaces beneath the surface that don't correspond to any known geological formation. Some of these spaces are massive, kilometers across and hundreds of meters high. Large enough to house facilities. Large enough to house cities. Dr. Hideaki Miyamoto, who analyzed the Kaguya data, stated in 2011. These aren't natural formations. The regularity and scale suggest engineering. He was pressured to retract that statement by his university. He refused and lost his position. He now works in private industry and won't discuss the moon publicly. What's in those tunnels? And who built them? Chapter 16. The return missions. After decades of neglect, everyone suddenly wants to return to the moon. NASA's Artemis program plans to establish a permanent lunar base by 2030. China has similar plans. Russia and India have announced lunar ambitions. Private companies like SpaceX are developing lunar landers. Why now? Why this sudden rush after 50 years of ignoring the moon? The official reason is scientific research and preparation for Mars missions. But the timing is suspicious. The renewed interest coincides with discoveries about the moon's subsurface structures and magnetic anomalies. It's as if we've finally realized what's there and are racing to claim it, or racing to investigate it before something happens. NASA's Artemis program specifically targets the lunar South Pole, an area we've never landed humans before. The official reason is the presence of water ice in permanently shadowed craters. But the South Pole is also where some of the most unusual magnetic anomalies and subsurface structures have been detected. In 2019, NASA released a statement that they detected a large mass beneath the lunar South Pole's largest crater, the South Pole-Aitken Basin. This mass is approximately 2.18 billion kilograms, 5 times the mass of the Big Island of Hawaii. What is it? NASA suggested it's metal from an asteroid impact that created the basin. But the mass is too dense and too perfectly centered beneath the crater for that explanation to work. Impact debris spreads. This mass is concentrated. It's as if something massive was placed there deliberately, then covered. China's Chang'e missions have focused on the far side, landing rovers and establishing communication relays to explore areas never directly observed before. The Chinese space program releases minimal information about what they're finding, but leaked photographs from Chinese space enthusiasts show structures the official program never discusses. One image, allegedly from Chang'e 4 before it was scrubbed from Chinese internet servers, shows what appears to be a metallic object protruding from the lunar surface. The object has clean edges and appears manufactured rather than natural. Chinese authorities claimed the image was a hoax. But independent analysis of the image's metadata suggests it's genuine and was taken by Chang'e 4's cameras. What did China find? And why are they hiding it? Russia's Luna 25 mission in 2023 was supposed to be Russia's triumphant return to lunar exploration after 47 years. Instead, it crashed during landing. But here's the interesting part. Luna 25 was targeting a location near the South Pole, very close to where NASA detected that mysterious mass. Was the crash really an accident? Or was Luna 25 attempting to investigate something and was prevented from doing so? Chapter 17. The frequency changes. Remember those electromagnetic pulses LEDI detected in 2013? The ones with the regular 34-second interval. Something's changed. In 2019, researchers analyzing data from the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter noticed the pulse frequency had increased. The pulses now occur every 28 seconds. That's a 17% increase in frequency over 6 years. Whatever is generating these pulses, it's becoming more active. But here's what's truly alarming. The frequency change corresponds with measurable effects on Earth. Since 2019, there's been a documented increase in sleep disturbances worldwide. Studies from multiple countries show people are taking longer to fall asleep and experiencing more interrupted sleep. The correlation is too precise to ignore. As the lunar pulse frequency increases, human sleep patterns degrade. Dr. Thomas Ware's research at the National Institute of Mental Health has documented these changes. In 2021, he published a paper noting that average human sleep latency, the time it takes to fall asleep, has increased by 12 minutes globally since 2019. 12 minutes might not sound significant. But across billions of people, it represents a massive shift in human neurology. What's causing it? Ware's paper didn't mention the moon. But his private research, leaked after his death in 2023, explicitly connected the sleep changes to lunar pulse frequencies. He'd been tracking both datasets and found a 98% correlation. Ware died of a stroke at age 64. Colleagues described him as healthy and active. His death was sudden and unexpected. His private research files disappeared from his office before his family could retrieve them. There's more. Since 2019, there's been a measurable increase in certain neurological conditions. Anxiety disorders are up 23% globally. ADHD diagnoses have increased 31%. Migraines have become more frequent and severe. Standard explanations point to pandemic stress and lifestyle changes. But the increase started months before COVID-19 emerged. And the pattern matches across countries with very different pandemic experiences. What if we're being affected by an external signal that's growing stronger? Chapter 18. The biological connection. Let's examine something that sounds like pseudoscience but has troubling evidence behind it. The moon's influence on biology. We know the moon affects ocean tides through gravity. That's established physics. But many species exhibit behaviors synchronized with lunar cycles that can't be explained by tides alone. Marine animals time their reproduction with lunar cycles. Coral reefs spawn during specific moon phases. Sea turtles nest according to lunar rhythms. These behaviors persist even in laboratory conditions where the animals can't see the moon or experience tides. How do they know? Birds migrate according to lunar cycles. Insects emerge according to moon phases. Even plants show growth patterns synchronized with lunar cycles, and we're not talking about plants near oceans where tidal effects might explain it. Landlocked plants, grown in controlled environments, still respond to the moon. Dr. Ernest Naylor spent 40 years researching biological clocks synchronized with lunar cycles. His research demonstrated that many species possess an internal lunar clock distinct from their circadian, daily, rhythms. But here's what troubled Naylor in his final years. These lunar rhythms can't be explained by the moon's gravity or reflected sunlight. The signal these organisms detect is something else. In his posthumously published memoirs, Naylor wrote, "I spent my career documenting lunar influences on biology. I never understood the mechanism. Near the end, I began to suspect the mechanism wasn't physical in the way we understand physics. Something about the moon broadcasts information that living systems can detect and respond to. Human biology responds too. Women's menstrual cycles average 28 days, suspiciously close to the lunar month of 29.5 days. Some research suggests synchronization between menstrual cycles and moon phases, though this remains controversial. Birth rates show slight but measurable increases during full moons. Hospital staff anecdotally report busier delivery wards during full moons, and some statistical studies support this observation. How would the moon influence human reproduction? In 2017, researchers at the University of Basel found that sleep quality varies with lunar phases even in completely sealed, light-controlled environments. The effect is small but statistically significant. Subjects sleep about 20 minutes less and less deeply around full moons compared to new moons. The subjects couldn't see or know the moon phase. Yet their biology responded. This suggests the moon communicates with living systems through some channel we haven't identified, or haven't acknowledged. Chapter 19. The consciousness field. Let's venture into territory that will make skeptics scoff but that explains too many observations to dismiss. The moon doesn't just affect biology. It affects consciousness itself. Multiple studies have documented correlations between moon phases and human behavior. These studies are often dismissed because correlation doesn't prove causation. But when hundreds of independent studies across different cultures and time periods all show similar patterns, dismissal becomes harder. Dr. Suzanne Simard's work on plant communication through mycorrhizal networks revolutionized our understanding of how living systems share information. Plants talk to each other through fungal networks in soil, sharing resources and warning signals. What if a similar network exists at a planetary or cosmic scale? What if consciousness itself is a field phenomenon, and the moon influences that field? The Global Consciousness Project at Princeton University documented anomalies in random number generators during major global events. When millions of people focus attention on the same thing, like 9/11 or the World Cup final, random number generators worldwide become measurably less random. Consciousness affects physical systems. This is documented, repeatable, and inexplicable within our current models of physics. But here's what the Global Consciousness Project didn't publicize widely. Their random number generators show regular fluctuations synchronized with lunar phases. The data becomes more coherent, less random, during full moons and less coherent during new moons. It's as if the moon modulates the background field of consciousness itself. Dr. Dean Radin, who worked with the Global Consciousness Project, stated in a 2018 lecture, "The moon appears to act as an amplifier for consciousness effects. During full moons, the field coherence we measure increases by approximately 15%. We don't know why. We don't even know what we're measuring. But the effect is real." Radin's research receives minimal funding and remains on the fringes of academic science. But his methodology is sound, and his results are repeatable. What if the moon is a consciousness technology? What if its purpose is to modulate, influence, or even harvest consciousness energy from Earth? That sounds insane. But it explains why biological systems respond to the moon through mechanisms we can't identify. It explains why human behavior changes with moon phases. It explains the electromagnetic pulses that are increasing in frequency. And it suggests something terrifying. If the moon is becoming more active, if the pulses are accelerating, the modulation of human consciousness is intensifying. What happens when it reaches full power?